June 23, 1971. Vesna Vulovic, a 22-year-old flight attendant from Belgrade, falls from a height of 10,160 meters, without a parachute, without an oxygen mask, without a single chance of survival. The Yugoslav Airlines plane, Flight 367, had just broken apart in the air over Czechoslovakia. A bomb planted by Croatian nationalists tore the fuselage to pieces. 27 people died instantly. And Vesna was flying downward through the icy air, trapped in a fragment of the tail section. And she survived. But on our luck scale, this is only 4 points out of 10. Because ahead are cases that will make you doubt the very laws of probability. I warn you, some stories are so incredible, they sound like fiction. But each one is documented. Let's start from the very beginning of the scale. Roy Sullivan worked as a ranger in Shenandoah National Park, Virginia. An ordinary man, short, stocky, with thick eyebrows and a calm voice. He loved the forest, knew every trail, every stream, and the forest, it seemed, loved him in return. But the sky had a different opinion. The first lightning strike hit Roy in 1942. He was standing on a fire lookout tower, a wooden structure about 20 meters tall. The storm crept up quickly. Lightning struck the tower directly, passed through his body, and exited through his foot. Roy lost the toenail on his big toe. First-degree burn. 2 weeks of sick leave. Unpleasant, but bearable. The second strike, 1969. Roy was driving a service truck along a mountain road. Lightning struck a tree nearby, bounced off, and flew in through the open window. Roy's eyebrows burned off completely. The hair on the left side of his head, gone too. The third, 1970. Roy was standing in the yard of his own house. Lightning hit a transformer, traveled along the wires, and struck him in the left shoulder. Second-degree burn. The fourth, 1972. Roy was working in a ranger station building. Lightning came through the roof and set his hair on fire. He put it out with a wet towel. By this point, Roy had already started carrying a bucket of water in his car, specifically for his hair. The fifth, 1973. Roy was watching an approaching storm and decided to drive away. He got in his car and drove half a mile. The lightning found him there too. It struck his head, set his hair on fire again, passed through his body, and knocked the boot off his left foot. Roy got out of the car, put out his hair with that very same bucket, and drove to the hospital. The sixth, 1976. Roy was walking along a trail in the park. Lightning struck the ground nearby and passed through his ankle. Ligament damage to the ankle joint. The seventh, 1977. Roy was fishing in a pond. Lightning struck the top of his head, passed through his entire body, and burned his chest and abdomen. He was taken to the hospital with third-degree burns. He spent 3 weeks there and survived again. 7 lightning strikes. The probability of a single strike hitting a person in their entire lifetime is approximately 1 in 15,300. The probability of 7 is 1 in 10 to the 28th power. That number is so enormous, it has no practical meaning. It is greater than the number of stars in the observable universe. The Guinness Book of Records recorded Roy Sullivan as the person struck by lightning the greatest number of times. His colleagues began avoiding him. Literally, people would move away from him at picnics. They would leave the room when the sky darkened outside the window. Roy became a living lightning rod and a living legend. On the luck scale, this is 2 points out of 10. Why so few? Because Roy suffered every time. He was lucky to survive, but not lucky enough to avoid it. True luck is when a catastrophe passes through you and leaves no trace, or almost none. And this is where we move on to a story that raises the bar. January 13, 1982, Washington, District of Columbia. Temperature -7 degrees Celsius. Snowfall. A Boeing 737 belonging to Air Florida, Flight 90, is preparing for takeoff from the National Airport. On board are 74 passengers and 5 crew members. Among the passengers is Priscilla Teatto, a 22-year-old secretary flying home to Tampa. She was sitting by the window, watching the snow cling to the wing. The plane accelerated down the runway, lifted off the ground, barely reached 150 feet in altitude. And then it stopped climbing. Ice on the wings. The engine sensors had iced over and were showing false readings. The pilots had not performed the de-icing procedure before takeoff. The plane began losing speed. 30 seconds after liftoff, the Boeing clipped the 14th Street Bridge, one of the busiest bridges in the capital. It knocked 6 cars and a truck off the bridge, killed 4 people on the bridge. Then it plunged into the Potomac River, covered in ice. Water temperature, 0 degrees Celsius. 70 of the 79 people on board must toss on impact or drowned in the first minutes. The fuselage went underwater. Debris was scattered across the frozen river. Rescuers arrived 20 minutes later. The helicopter could not take off earlier due to the blizzard. Priscilla Teatto somehow ended up in the water among the wreckage. She could not swim. Her winter coat was soaked and pulling her down. Her body temperature began to drop. At 0 degrees, a person loses consciousness within 15 to 45 minutes. Priscilla clung to a piece of fuselage. The helicopter finally arrived and lowered a rope. Priscilla grabbed it, but her hands would not obey. Her muscles were already stiffening from the cold. She let go and went under the water again. Television cameras were filming this live. Millions of Americans watched as a woman drowned in an icy river. And then, something astonishing happened. Lenny Skutnik, a 28-year-old office worker from the Congressional Budget Office, was standing on the shore among the onlookers. He watched as Priscilla went under the water. He kicked off his shoes and jacket and jumped into the icy river. 0 degrees, the distance to Priscilla, about 25 meters. Lenny swam to her, grabbed her, and pulled her onto the ice. Both survived. Priscilla spent about 22 minutes in the water, 3rd-degree hypothermia. Her body temperature dropped to 30 degrees Celsius, frostbite on the fingers of both hands. But she survived. Of the 79 people on board, only 5 survived. Priscilla was one of them. On the luck scale, 4 points. She survived a plane crash, endured 22 minutes in icy water, and was saved by a random passerby who dared to make a suicidal leap. 3 impossible coincidences in a row. However, there are people whose luck goes beyond simple circumstance. People who seem to cancel out physics. His name was Alan McGee, 23 years old, navigator on a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber. On January 3, 1943, his plane was returning from a bombing raid on Saint-Nazaire in France. German anti-aircraft guns riddled the bomber. 2 of the 4 engines caught fire. The plane began breaking apart in the air. Alan fell out of the shattered nose glazing from a height of 6,700 meters. His parachute had been damaged by shrapnel. It did not open. Alan was falling at a speed of approximately 190 kilometers per hour. 6,700 meters of freefall, approximately 40 seconds of flight. He crashed through the glass roof of the Saint-Nazaire railway station. The glass and metal structure partially slowed his fall. Alan slammed onto the stone floor of the station. German soldiers found him unconscious, with 28 broken bones, a punctured lung, a damaged spine, and a broken nose. He was alive. A German military surgeon performed an operation that lasted several hours. Alan was placed in a prisoner of war camp. He spent 2 years there. After liberation, he returned to America. He lived another 63 years. He died in 2003 at the age of 84. A fall from 6,700 meters without a parachute, 28 fractures, and a full recovery. The probability of surviving a free fall from such a height without a parachute is statistically 0. Not 1%, not 0.1%, 0. Fewer than 20 such cases have been recorded in history. Alan McGee is one of them. On the luck scale, 5 points. And we have not even reached the middle yet, because the next story is not just luck. It is repeating, systematic, almost mocking luck for one person over the course of decades. Frane Selak was born in 1929 in Croatia, an ordinary music teacher from Zagreb. Short, balding, with a gentle smile and a quiet voice. A man whom the press would later call the luckiest in the world. Or the unluckiest, depending on your point of view. 1962. Frane was traveling by train from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik. January. Cold. The train was running alongside a river. At some point the rails iced over. The train derailed and plunged into the icy river. 17 passengers died. Frane somehow got out of the sinking car. He swam to shore with a broken arm, bruises, and hypothermia. But alive. 1963. Frane was flying from Zagreb to Rijeka. It was his first and last flight on an airplane. The cargo hold door was torn off in midair. Depressurization. Frane was thrown from the plane. He landed in a haystack in a field. 19 people on board died. Frane got away with bruises and shock. This story sounds incredible, and some researchers question it. But Frane repeated it until the end of his life, and Croatian journalists found confirmation in the airline's archives. 1966. The bus Frane was riding in flew off the road and fell into a river. 4 dead. Frane swam out with cuts and bruises. 1970. Frane was driving his car. The engine caught fire. Frane managed to jump out 3 seconds before the fuel tank exploded and the car turned into a fireball. 1973. Another car of Frane's, another fire. This time a fuel system malfunction drove flames through the ventilation openings directly into the cabin. Frane lost most of the hair on his head, but survived. 1995. Frane was walking down a street in Zagreb. A city bus hit him at a pedestrian crossing. Minor injuries. 3 days in the hospital. 1996. Frane was driving along a mountain road. A truck came flying around a bend. A head-on collision was inevitable. Frane turned the wheel, the car broke through the guardrail and flew into a ravine 90 meters deep. Frane was somehow thrown from the car. He caught hold of a tree on the slope. He hung there until rescuers arrived. The car burned at the bottom of the gorge. Frane is in not a single fracture. 7 catastrophes over 34 years. A train, a plane, a bus, 3 cars, and being hit by a vehicle. And not a single serious life-threatening injury. The probability of surviving all of this, mathematicians do not even attempt to calculate it. Too many variables, too little sense. And then in 2003, Frane bought a lottery ticket and won 800,000 euros, as if the universe decided to apologize. On the luck scale, 6 points. Systematic, repeating, inexplicable luck over the course of an entire lifetime. But still, every time Frane was injured, every time he suffered, every time he could have died, his luck was painful. But the next case, this is pure luck. Instantaneous, painless, and absolutely impossible. November 30th, 1979. The North Sea, the Alexander L. Killand oil platform, a semi-submersible accommodation platform moored to the Ekofisk oil field off the coast of Norway. On board, 212 people, workers, engineers, cooks, medics, evening. Many were watching a movie in the recreation room. The storm was intensifying as waves up to 12 meters high, wind at 40 meters per second. At 6:30 in the evening, one of the platform's 5 support columns cracked, a fatigue crack in a weld seam. The metal gave way. The platform tilted 30 degrees within minutes. People tumbled from the decks into the icy sea. Water temperature, 7 degrees Celsius. At that temperature, a person loses the ability to move within 10 to 15 minutes, loses consciousness within 15 to 30. 123 people died. 89 survived. Among the survivors was a man named Roy Anker Olsen. He was sleeping in his cabin when the platform began to capsize. He was thrown from his bunk. He ran out onto the deck in nothing but his underwear and socks. The deck was already nearly vertical. Roy jumped into the sea from a height of about 20 meters, into icy water, into a storm, without a life jacket. He swam in the North Sea for 40 minutes. His body temperature dropped to 32 degrees. He could no longer feel his legs when a rescue vessel picked him up. Roy lost 2 close friends that night, but he himself survived. A jump from 20 meters into a stormy sea at 7 degrees, 40 minutes without a life jacket. However, that is not all. Roy Anker Olsen returned to the oil platforms. He continued working, and on July 6, 1988, he found himself on the Piper Alpha platform, the largest production platform in the world in the North Sea, off the coast of Scotland. That evening, a gas condensate leak led to an explosion, then to a series of explosions. The flame temperature reached 1,200 degrees Celsius. Steel structures melted. 167 people out of 226 on board died. It was the largest catastrophe in the history of oil extraction. Roy jumped into the sea again, from a burning platform, from a height of about 30 meters, again into the North Sea, Again, he survived. 2 times. The 2 largest maritime catastrophes in the history of the oil industry. One person. Both times. A leap into icy sea. Both times. Alive. On the luck scale, 7 points. And we are approaching territory where luck ceases to be coincidence and begins to look like an anomaly. Because the next story is not about a catastrophe. It is about a bullet. Henry Zieglin lived in Texas at the end of the 19th century, an ordinary farmer. In 1883, he left his sweetheart. The girl could not bear the breakup and took her own life. Her brother swore revenge. He found Henry, aimed a revolver at him, and fired point blank. The bullet hit Henry in the head. The brother, believing Henry was dead, shot himself on the spot. But Henry was alive. The bullet had merely grazed his temple, traveled around the skull under the skin, and lodged in a tree standing right behind him. A shallow wound. Henry treated it and went on living. The bullet remained in the tree. 20 years passed. 1903. Henry decided to cut down that very tree. The trunk was too thick for an axe. Henry placed a stick of dynamite. The explosion dislodged the bullet from the wood. It flew several meters and struck Henry right in the head. This time, fatally. The bullet fired 20 years earlier had found its target after all. This is not exactly a story of luck, rather a story of incredible bad luck with a 20-year delay. But the very fact that a man survived a point-blank gunshot to the head, lived another 20 years, and was killed by that same bullet. This is an event with a probability that is impossible to calculate. On the luck scale, for the initial survival, 6 points. For the ending, 0. The universe, as it turned out, keeps its books. But not always. Because some people, the universe forgives everything. Tsutomu Yamaguchi woke up on the morning of August 6, 1945, in a hotel in the city of Hiroshima. He was 29 years old, an engineer at the Mitsubishi Company. He had come to Hiroshima on a business trip. He was designing an oil tanker. The trip was coming to an end. Tsutomu packed his things, had breakfast, and headed to the shipyard. It was 8:15. At 8:16, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped the atomic bomb Little Boy on the center of Hiroshima. The blast yield was between 13 and 18 kilotons in TNT equivalent. The temperature at the epicenter was several million degrees. The shockwave moved at the speed of sound. Thermal radiation burned the shadows of people into concrete. Tsutomu was approximately 3 kilometers from the epicenter. The flash. He described it as a second sun igniting right before his eyes. The shockwave lifted him into the air and hurled him into a potato field. He lost consciousness. When he came to, his left eardrum was ruptured, the left side of his body was burned, and he was temporarily blind in both eyes. Hiroshima was burning. Black rain, radioactive fallout, was falling from the sky. Tsutomu, burned and half-deaf, made his way to the railway station. Trains, strangely enough, were running. He boarded a train and headed home. Home to the city of Nagasaki. On August 8th, Tsutomu reached Nagasaki. On August 9th, 3 days after Hiroshima, he went to work. His boss did not believe the story about the atomic bomb. Tsutomu was standing in an office on the second floor, trying to explain what had happened in Hiroshima, that a single bomb had destroyed an entire city. At 11:02, the B-29 bomber Boxcar dropped the second atomic bomb, Fat Man, on Nagasaki. The yield, 21 kilotons. Tsutomu was again approximately 3 kilometers from the epicenter. Again the flash. Again the shock wave. Again he was hurled. The bandages that had been applied in Hiroshima were torn off by the blast. His burns reopened. New burns layered on top of the old ones. Tsutomu lost consciousness. He survived. 2 nuclear explosions, 2 atomic bombs. The only person officially recognized by the Japanese government as having survived both blasts. Although, according to researchers, there may have been as many as 165 such people, those who were in both cities on the days of the bombings. Tsutomu Yamaguchi lived another 65 years. He suffered from the effects of radiation his entire life. Temporary blindness, permanent hearing loss in his left ear, chronic radiation sickness, leukemia in old age. But he worked, married, and raised children. He became an active advocate for nuclear disarmament. He spoke at the United Nations. He wrote a book. He died on January 4, 2010, at the age of 93. from stomach cancer caused, in the opinion of his doctors, by radiation exposure. 2 nuclear explosions, 3 kilometers from the epicenter each time, and 93 years of life. On the luck scale, 8 points. But one position remains. 9 points, the maximum. And this story is not about war, not about a catastrophe, not about the elements. This story is about the human body and its absolute limit. Anna Bogenholm was a 30-year-old orthopedic surgeon from Sweden. On May 20th, 1999, she was skiing with 2 colleagues in the mountains near Narvik, in northern Norway. The slope was steep. Anna lost control and slid into a frozen stream. The ice broke. Anna fell through into the water. The current pulled her under the ice cover. She found herself beneath a layer of ice approximately 20 centimeters thick. The water was close to 0 degrees. Anna found an air pocket between the water and the ice, a small space where she could breathe. Her colleagues tried to pull her out, grabbing her legs, her ski boots, but the current was too strong. Anna spent 40 minutes under the ice, breathing from the air pocket. Then the pocket disappeared. The water rose. Anna stopped breathing. Her body began to cool. Rapidly, the water temperature was doing its work. Rescuers arrived after an hour. A helicopter transported her to the University Hospital of Tromsø. By the time she was admitted, Anna's body temperature was 13.7 degrees Celsius. This is the lowest recorded body temperature of a surviving person in the history of medicine. Normal temperature is 36.6. Anna was colder by 23 degrees. Her heart was not beating. She was not breathing. Her pupils did not react to light. By all clinical criteria, Anna Bogenholm was dead for over an hour. But the doctors in Tromsø decided to try. They connected her to a heart-lung machine. Slowly, degree by degree, they began warming the blood. The procedure lasted several hours, and what no one expected happened. Anna's heart began beating again, on its own, without an electric shock, without stimulation. It simply started beating, as if someone had pressed the power button. Anna spent several months in the hospital. Paralysis below the waist, temporary. Nerve damage in her hands, partially recovered. Kidney failure, resolved. A year and a half later, Anna returned to work as a surgeon, the very same orthopedic surgeon she had been before the catastrophe. She operated on patients with the very same hands that had been dead for more than an hour. A medical explanation exists, and it is itself incredible. The cold water cooled Anna's body so quickly that her brain and organs entered a state close to hibernation. Her metabolism slowed to nearly 0. The cells stopped consuming oxygen, and therefore they did not die. This is called protective hypothermia. The cold that should have killed Anna paradoxically saved her. But here is what matters. This happens extremely rarely. In the vast majority of cases, drowning in ice-cold water ends in death. Even if the body cools rapidly, even if rescuers arrive in time, the brain is damaged irreversibly. The heart does not restart. The organs fail. Nowadays, an exception among exceptions. A case that has been included in every resuscitation textbook in the world. 13.7 degrees. More than an hour without a heartbeat. Full recovery. A return to surgical practice. On the luck scale, 9 points out of 10. The maximum. Because Anna Bogenholm did not simply survive under impossible conditions. She died by every medical definition and came back without brain damage, without loss of professional skills, without disability. She passed through the absolute 0 of human existence and came out the other side. Why not 10? Because 10 would mean nothing had happened to her at all. But Anna did fall through the ice. She did drown. She did lie dead on the operating table. Luck is not the absence of misfortune. Luck is when misfortune did everything it could and still lost. 9 stories, 9 people. Lightning, atomic bombs, falls from 6,000 meters, icy rivers, burning platforms, bullets with a 20-year delay, and a body temperature of 13 degrees. Each of them should have died. Statistics, physics, medicine, everything was against them. And each of them sits on the other side of those statistics, alive. Here's the question I want to ask you. If you could choose to be incredibly lucky but constantly end up in catastrophes like Franz Selak, or to live a quiet, safe, completely ordinary life, What would you choose? Write in the comments. And if you had the nerve to listen all the way to the end, subscribe. This is where those gather who do not turn away from the impossible.